this machine is going to be popular, and I mean it's going to be really popular. So, I think that was an understatement. Anyway, I've got two now. The left was the old Beta one that you saw before. The right one is a new one. It's a production one. I bought it with money. Weird, right? Let's go. This video is sponsored by PCB Way. So the main purpose of this video is really to convey two things. Firstly, I want to show you the differences between the beta unit and the final production unit. That is, as I mentioned, a completely randomly assigned production unit. This is not sent to me by Snapmaker. I bought it the same way you did. Secondly, I want to just reflect on the experience after about 5 months of owning the Snapmaker Beta unit. I do keep getting asked to do these kind of after 5 months ownership reviews, which normally isn't a particularly viable strategy given how quickly printers disappear off the market. But since we're here and there's still a pretty big audience for the Snapmaker U1, because most of you probably haven't got yours yet, I might as well do it. So, where to start? The first thing you might notice in the game of Spot the Difference is the minor changes to the unit that have pretty much no effect on its functionality. They have, for some reason, moved the logo up. I don't know why. Which do you prefer? Does it look better? Does it matter? A few bits of text like the warning on the bed. And this one was my suggestion, actually, or at least I'm taking credit for it. The incorrect docking of the tool heads when you put them in manually, which you do on assembling the printer, is now marked with red paint, so you can immediately see if a dock is not inserted correctly. The wheels under the bed are now also yellow instead of black. I don't know why. Nobody's going to see this. Maybe they just had more yellow plastic than they knew what to do with. On to more functional differences. The first one I wondered about was the side spool mounts. One of the suggestions arising from the beta testing was to make these attached stronger to the printer, as sometimes the spool holders were coming off when you took the reel off the machine, which wasn't a huge issue really. You could put them back on, but I guess that would wear over time. It's not ideal. It really needed to be fixed. This does seem to have been fixed, but the case itself, the plastic surrounding it, still kind of feels very okay, if you know what I mean. We do have to bear in mind that this machine is still available for $849 as of the time of me making this video, so you can't expect $1,700 build quality out of a machine that's also a tool changer that is under $1,000. Moving on, behind the reel holders, the feeders seem different somehow. I don't know if anything has changed mechanically, but they are behaving differently, and they are behaving possibly more stably than the beta ones. It's very soon to tell, because I've obviously only just got the production machine. The beta version of these feeders was something that I thought would be, if there was a weak point in this printer, it would be these feeders. So it's good to see that they've put some effort into making those work more stably, or at least I hope that's what they've done. See if you can spot the difference. The loading overall of the filament by these feeders is less confusing now, but I think there's still sort of a basic expectation that users have that these will load fully and purge at the time that you insert the filament, because most printers, you put the filament in, it heats the nozzle, it loads it, you confirm it's loaded, and then when it comes to print time, it's already loaded. They don't work like this. They load to nearly the extruder, but in order to not heat the extruder because it's quicker, the tool head status will be in an intermediate state, where it knows that there's filament loaded, but it hasn't actually fed it to the nozzle. This means you can also remove it before it loads. This is sensible, but it's an easy thing to not understand that that's the way the machine is working, and I think it could cause a lot of people to be initially confused as to how the machine works, and possibly think that there's faults when there isn't. So I would advise that you pay attention to the sequence that this kind of goes in, and not try to kind of over-manage it. Let it take care of itself, as long as you're not getting like a red light condition on the feeder. While we're talking about feeding filament, the tubes that go from the back of the machine into the tool head, these are wider, they seem slightly refined, but I do want to point out the confusion I saw after the last video regarding feeding filament into the machine. You are in no way compelled to use the reel holders, or even the filament feeders, or even any of the PTFE tubing. Obviously you do this at your own risk, and it's all down to you to manage this. Or indeed, if you want to use a dry box, you can bypass any part of these filament lines as you wish. The system will not need any adjustments for this to happen, as the spool holder is passive and the feeder is essentially not used after the initial loading process, and there is a manual loading process that you would use instead. The big changes that we did expect, because it was the main part that was unfinished at the time of the last video, was the printer's firmware. And I said at the time that this would make or break the printer, and obviously I was very concerned about that because I couldn't see it actually finished by the time I made the review. I think we need a drum roll. And it's good news. It seems like this is almost entirely ironed out as far as I could tell. This is obviously a relief, as the firmware did previously have a lot of minor annoyances, and it was incomplete, and while that didn't affect the ability of me to print, it kind of did make for a suboptimal user interface experience, and I did express all this at the time. The market does not have a lot of tolerance these days for these kind of user interface problems in these kind of machines at these kind of price points. And before we continue, I want to show you this cool PCB I've made using today's sponsor, which is of course PCB Way. And I'm also in the middle of something new. I seem to start more projects than I finish, which is a sentiment I'm sure you're all familiar with, but I can't talk too much yet about what this does because A, I might not finish it, and that would be embarrassing. B, if you're thinking it looks complicated for my design abilities, you're actually not wrong. It is indeed something I'm not doing on my own. What I need to do though is design a PCB for it, which I'm about to do with PCB Way. The idea is to have it fit the footprint on the back of this thing, but broadly serve the same functions as the one I just showed you that I made here. So it's basically an attempt to miniaturize this idea and remove some of the connections because we don't need them, and just make the whole thing a bit better fitting for this application. And that shouldn't even be that huge a problem, even using all the same components. Anyway, once I'm done with the design part, which I will be doing as soon as this video is released, I can export the Gerber files out and upload them straight to PCB Way's website, where they will pretty much take care of the rest, and I'll shortly get a hold of the PCBs, and I'll be able to continue with this project, and hopefully you'll see it in a future video which is coming soon, probably video after next. Feel free to guess what it's part of. I will be genuinely impressed if you can get even close to the right answer as to what this thing is. If you need PCBs making, or if you need anything else, like for example I might replace this gear here for a nylon SLS part, anything like that, you can get it made at PCB Way. And all the information you need, including material specific information, is all there on their website, so check it out in the links in the description, where there is, as always, a new user discount coupon. Thank you PCB Way for sponsoring this video. Back to it. Networking was the biggest problem that I and others had. I am happy to report that the new printer actually showed up in the slicer immediately, and I've even brought receipts. You can see that happening on screen. Also, I didn't record this, but adding the printer to the Snapmaker app actually worked surprisingly smoothly as well. I am very much a LAN mode user. I don't really spend a lot of time away, so I don't need to see the printer while I'm away. I certainly don't leave it printing while I'm away that much, so I primarily work in LAN mode, and I don't see any issues or lack of functionality even using the app, which is kind of surprising. You don't get penalized in any way functionally by using LAN mode, as far as I can tell. So I think a lot of people are probably quite happy to know that. Still on the firmware and menus, we have over-the-air updates now. That means it happens over Wi-Fi. Once I finish this video, I do intend to try to do whatever update I can on the beta unit to get that working on OTA updates as well. I've kept it on the original firmware right from when I did the review, so that I can make this video. There's a few other minor things on the UI that I'll show on screen while I talk about this, but really it's kind of a combination of not much has visibly changed on the UI, but also they've kind of made everything that didn't work, if that makes sense. The camera, both in the slicer and the app, both seem to work fine now. That was something some people were having a few issues with. I don't think I had any issues with it in the slicer. I seem to recall I might have not been able to see the camera in the app, but all that seems to be working now with no issues. So those are the differences that I've observed, and it does seem entirely positive. The entire experience I had as a customer was surprisingly trouble-free in all aspects, aside from having dropped a screw down the PTFE tube where the toolhead tube connects. I don't suggest doing that. It's incredibly difficult to get that back out. I'd almost recommend putting tape over them while you assemble them, because if you drop a screw in there, it is... yeah, don't. There was a sticker on the box telling me not to over-tighten the screws on the USB cable where it enters the tool head, and we have also been warned about this on several occasions in other places, so obviously it's something that Snapmaker are concerned about. I don't entirely understand the mechanics here, but I think what probably happened is the USB cable that connects the tool head to the back of the printer is symmetric, i.e. it's the same at both ends, and at one end you can see you've got a kind of spacer for whatever this stability arm thing is, and on the other end you can potentially deform the fitting if you carry on tightening the cable past where it would be essentially completely correctly tightened, if that makes sense. So watch out for that. At least if you're an early unit owner, I would guess they're going to fix this as soon as they can, but it might take time to sort of roll out. Really, overall, I'm actually quite optimistic about how this printer release is going. Usually, people who adopt a product early, they get all the teething problems, but I am hearing mostly good things from people on Discord and people that I know who have received their units. The warning I will give you that there is always an inevitable frequency bias of problems appearing more common than they are on the internet, because people who have problems tend to talk about them. I think there is every sign that these units are coming off the production line in good working order, but it is of course still very early days. I think we need to see a lot more machines out there to really get the full picture. So what about my personal experience after 5 months? Well, again, mostly positive. I did actually have one issue that I didn't know I had until the new unit arrived. I noticed that the beta one was making a lot more noise when Z-hopping, which literally only through the magic of having 2 of them I realised is not normal. I had been tuning down the Z-hop thinking that this was just a noisy machine or there was some backlash in the Z-screws, but what was actually going on was under the base of the printer. There is a very non-automatic belt tension mechanism that should not be operating while the printer is printing. You're supposed to loosen these 2 screws, tension the belt automatically using the springs by presumably just wiggling the belt around. I've not seen any instructions on how to do this yet. I'm sure they're out there, I just haven't looked. On my beta unit, for some reason, those 2 screws were loose, and so that was allowing the springs that tension, and then you're supposed to lock it down, they were causing a lot of noise. It wasn't actually affecting print quality so far as I could see, but it was definitely making a rather annoying kind of banging noise. So if you think that your Z-hop is noisier than it should be, it's not quiet, but it shouldn't be making a banging noise, then it might be useful to check those screws. Otherwise, I haven't been a particularly heavy user of the Snapmaker U1, as I tend not to print large or long print time objects, but I did use the machine for the HueForge video recently, and I think I used it in the PCB video too. And I've also been using it in some planning for an upcoming video, which I can't talk about yet. I know you're all expecting stories of tool heads smacking into each other, but it just doesn't really happen in reality. I think exactly once the printer wasn't able to align properly and pick up a tool, and it errored out, and that was solved by just asking it to home again. It never happened again. I'm sorry if this is just not as dramatic as you'd like it to be. Doesn't make for a good story, but it is what it is. And I think that issues with printers is a very random thing. It doesn't imply nobody's had any issues, so I suppose it's worth mentioning that I haven't needed to disassemble the tool heads at all. I'm sure you'll find that hard to believe that I've managed to print with this machine for 5 months without having to disassemble the tool heads, but that is how it has happened. I understand it's not a trivial task to take these apart, so I guess it's probably quite good if you don't have to do it very often, and I guess I have to say it, but I haven't had any issues with the pogo pin connections either. Hopefully at some point we can put the pogo pin thing to bed, as I'm not actually aware of anyone having issues with the pogo pins, even the people who've done a lot more printing than I have. It is a wear component, and eventually, presumably, you'll have to set aside something like half an hour per toolhead maintenance time to change them over. It's really not a huge issue in my opinion, but obviously it's a contentious point for reasons that are beyond the scope of this video. I will tell you what is annoying though, and this is not specifically an issue with this machine, but it is kind of a little bit more annoying with this machine. It's a general warning. If you aren't using your printer for a while, and this goes for any printer that has long filament lines, AMSs are particularly annoying as well in this respect, make sure to completely unload the filament, especially if it's PLA. It seems to take as little as a week, possibly less, before PLA decides it wants to snap into several pieces, and it will do this in the tubes on modern machines, and I still haven't seen a compelling reason why this actually happens, even though I've seen a lot of theories, and I have a lot of theories myself. I don't actually think it's related to humidity, or at least I don't think it's directly related to humidity. We are going to need to figure out some printed tool to clear these wider tubes out, because they are where the pain point is. You can't push broken filament out with filament like you can with narrower tubes, so at some point maybe I'll get annoyed enough to design some kind of snake tool. It seems like a solvable problem, but at the moment you're kind of shaking it and trying to push random things inside the tubes. So going forward, we're still waiting on the Clipper source being shared. I've actually sent this particular question to Snapmaker at the same time as I'm making the video, because why plan ahead when you can not plan ahead? I did also do a diff on the Clipper config files to detect changes there, and that was primarily the printer config file. There's not a lot of changes, or not a lot of meaningful changes. Something about input shaper has been changed, but I don't see it being anything massive. And there's some talk about tangle detection. Going back to hardware, we are still waiting for the lid, and we're waiting for other nozzle sizes. You might have ordered them. I can't comment on those yet because I don't have them either. ETA is March, I think, on the lid. So in summary, not much to say that hasn't already been said. Not much dramatically has changed, and not much in terms of surprises, which it's a good thing, I'm sure you'll agree, that it seems Snapmaker are actually delivering on their promises in a rather undramatic fashion. I think there was a lot of initial suspicion about the machine for various reasons, not least the price, and I think we're going to start to see it land in the hands of real people, and for better or worse, I think we're going to see exactly how that pans out. As I mentioned already, I'm sure that solely due to the volume of machines that the Snapmaker sold, it's going to be quite an intense few months for Snapmaker themselves and anyone watching, as we see all these new users figuring out the machines. But I also think this is an interesting time in FDM history, whether you have or haven't ordered this printer. If you think about it, this and Bontex Index, this is the first time that a large number of users potentially have access to this kind of technology, and the relatively unconstrained freedom to mix materials and not worry about the waste. On a personal level, I'm actually really curious to see what new designs and ideas people are able to come up with now that that's available. That's it though. If you ordered one and received it, let me know what you think and whether you're having a good time with it. If you're still waiting, then oh well. If you're getting FOMO because you didn't order it, then that's an entirely natural response to the situation, but I think the pre-order wait times have actually been shortened. So go check the links below, and you might find yourself $850 poorer if you have terrible impulse control. I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.